Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Switch to the phone company that supports your beliefs. All plans start under $50 before taxes and surcharges. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special offer.
This weekend, we got news. I reported on it late last week that the Diocese of Charlotte was going to start removing altar rails, or at least banning reception of the Eucharist, kneeling at an altar rail. The general instruction of the Roman Missal doesn't actually give them permission to do this. The Church has always said, you have the right to receive the Eucharist kneeling and on the tongue if you wish, in the traditional method of receiving in the Latin West. Communion in the hand was actually not called for by Vatican II. It was done by the revolutionaries after the council. The Vatican tried to stop that spread from happening and finally gave up. It was actually implemented through disobedience. Now, they are calling it disobedient to receive the Eucharist the same way your great-grandparents did. And they're doing this to defend what they call the only expression of the Roman rite. They're cracking down on all things sacred in the Church while this kind of nonsense happens. We're going to mute this because that's copyrighted music, but it's dance music, and this is happening at a Catholic Mass while the priest is acting like a hype man or something, and everyone is dancing at a Mass. This video clip started showing up online in the last few days. When you hear them tell you it's a different religion, you should believe them because they do things like this to show you they believe it's a different religion. This is not Catholicism you're seeing. They may have a valid Eucharist, although part of what makes a Eucharist valid is having the intention to do what the Church always does when offering the Eucharistic rite. And you have to wonder if the priest who would do such a thing has the same intention to do what the Church has always done. The Vatican could restore some hope for people by cracking down on such things, but they don't. So we turn here first to J.D. Flynn. He says, J.D. Flynn, one of the main minds behind Pillar Catholic, so tweeted this earlier. I've since confirmed that at present, one Charlotte parish will discontinue use of altar rails November 30th and confirmed policy coming after discussion at Presbyterial Council meeting. The full diocesan policy with start date has not yet been sent to all pastors. Now, that having been said, Charlotte Latin Mass community, these are the watchdog group in the diocese, and it's sad state of affairs when your diocese has a lay watchdog group and it's very busy to protect the integrity of the Catholic faith. But here we are. Welcome to the crisis in the Church. They posted to X yesterday saying, we have now learned that two of the largest parishes in the Charlotte diocese with altar rails will voluntarily discontinue use of them beginning in Advent in order to remain obedient to the bishop and consistent with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops norm. What was reverent and good last week is no longer. Note this, consistent with the USCCB norm. This is coming to a diocese near you. The announcement at one of the parishes, again, important to note, this impacts the Novus Ordo Mass in Charlotte and not the diocesan TLM chapel. This is not an attack on the TLM. This is, some of us tried to warn you, this was coming to your parish, not just the TLM. Here's the priest announcing it.
Here's a message from Father Putnam. I would encourage everyone to read my pastoral pondering in the bulletin this weekend regarding the reception of communion during Mass. While Bishop Martin's document on Holy Communion has not yet been promulgated, it is expected, and all parishes are expected, to observe the proper norms of the U.S. bishops regarding the reception of Holy Communion. And keeping with these norms, which indicate that the posture for the reception of communion is to receive standing, either on the tongue or in the hand in procession. Therefore, beginning the first Sunday of Advent, we will no longer be using the altar rails for the reception of Holy Communion. Nonetheless, the law of the Church affirms that each communicant has the right to kneel to receive Holy Communion. I would just ask that you be prudent in exercising this right with regard to your own physical ability and safety. To facilitate this change, we will be adding more stations for the distribution of Holy Communion, as was the case prior to COVID. Over the next several weeks, we will be offering some additional catechesis to help us make the transition.
Note that last sentence. They will be offering catechesis. And he also emphasized that the law of the church allows you to receive on the tongue. Given that we just saw an attack on titles of the Virgin Mary, they go back to St. Augustine. Basically, I would suggest that it's not outside the realm of possibility that you might see a document from Rome changing the law on how to receive. As many have noted, this looks like a coordinated attack. What's been happening in several dioceses, going after altar rails, valid reception of the Eucharist, and all sorts of other things, including suppression of the traditional Mass. But many of us tried to warn people. When they're done with us, they're coming for your reverent Novus Ordo Masses. And what's most mind-boggling about this, we constantly hear about a vocations crisis in the church. We need more priests, they tell us. And then they drum out of the seminaries, the conservative men, the obviously naturally inclined men, we'll say, those men who have a bad taste, apparently, to pray the pre-Vatican II breviary. Maybe they pray the rosary publicly. They keep the devotions, traditional devotions. They don't hide these things. And as such, that makes some people in the seminary uncomfortable. And so they get drummed out. We get this from the Liturgy Guy blog. He did some number crunching. And this is coming right out of Charlotte, where they're suppressing altar rails. Headline is 75% of Charlotte seminarians come from parishes with altar rails. I mean, come on. This is the bishop there just trying to destroy his own diocese, exacerbating problems that they already have, because every diocese has vocations issues. There are some dioceses with what you might call sustainable levels of vocations. But even in those cases, that's with a decline going on. Here, Charlotte's not one of them. And 3/4 of their seminarians come from dioceses or parishes with altar rails. This weekend, the faithful of Charlotte have learned that as of the first Sunday of Advent, November 30th, 2025, Bishop Michael Martin has ordered that altar rails should no longer be used for the distribution of Holy Communion in the Diocese of Charlotte. Additionally, any parishes using kneelers or unfixed rails must remove them. This, we have been told, is to remain consistent with the norms established by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Well, just announced, the faithful are already being told that obedience requires submission. However, we have also heard, unconfirmed, that some priests may be reviewing this with canon lawyers, or even requesting a clarification from Rome. We hope that more seek this route, as the USCCB does not forbid the use of altar rails, but rather simply states that the norm is to receive standing, while fully permitting the faithful to kneel. It would seem to be a matter of both justice and charity for the Church to provide assistance for those who choose to kneel, accomplished by distributing at an altar rail. Indeed, the cultural norm at a significant number of parishes in the diocese is for the faithful to receive kneeling and on the tongue. However, it isn't just the number of parishes that is interesting, but rather which parishes and what else is happening there. This past week, the USCCB celebrated its annual National Vocations Awareness Week. As stated on their website, quote, National Vocations Awareness Week is an annual week-long celebration of the Catholic Church in the United States dedicated to promoting vocations to the priesthood, diaconate, and consecrated life. One of the most healthy and robust areas inherited by Bishop Martin from his predecessor, Bishop Peter Hughes, is priestly vocations. Currently, Charlotte lists 44 seminarians on their website, an impressive number for a diocese of about 500,000 Catholics. Additionally, the diocese has ordained 13 men to the priesthood in just the past 2 years, with another 7 set to be ordained in 2026. But there's something else interesting about the boom in vocations in the Charlotte Diocese. 75% of those young men come from parishes where the use of altar rails or communion kneelers has been the norm. Not just has these, it's the norm for receiving them. Consider that 3 out of every 4 men in seminary in Charlotte had their vocations fostered in parishes which utilize altar rails. To be clear, in no way should we assume that correlation is causation. Obviously, the discernment process and the fostering of vocations is complex, from God's call to the prayerful attentiveness to hear and to say yes, to the support at home from family as well as from the parish community and the pastor. However, it would also seem irresponsible to ignore that 75% of Charlotte's current seminarians and well over half of their recent classes of ordinance come from such parishes. A recent study even suggested what many of the faithful would say is obvious: how we receive the Eucharist and how a community supports that reception through traditional practices such as kneeling for communion plays a sizable part in Eucharistic reverence and belief. As we consider all these matters, we can only hope that someone will share this information with Bishop Martin. I do hope so. Not sure it'll make much of a difference, but I do hope people share it with him. I also saw people, amazingly, calling for a letter writing campaign to the dicastery of the bishops and the dicastery of the liturgy, maybe even to Cardinal Fernandez himself, to report the bishop for being a meanie head. Bishop Martin, and I seem to be the only one in the world who remembers this, Bishop Martin and the other bishops all said they had received contact from Rome asking them to fully implement Traditionis Custodes. And one of the letters, there were several documents in the orbit of Traditionis Custodes, responses ad dubia, which was issued by the Vatican in response to a dubia that had been submitted on it, accompanying letters by Pope Francis, and a few other things. In one of those documents, you had a overt call to ban what they called accretions of the traditional Mass into the Novus Ordo. This would be, if your priest was starting to add more signs of the cross during his the consecration, because the sign of the cross is invoked like 50-something times in the traditional Latin Mass, far fewer times in the Novus Ordo, and a few other practices, just outright banned. Altar rails and as your norm for receiving kneeling on the tongue is one of them. And so what's the bishop doing? He's banning it all. In every parish except for the one traditional Mass offered there. And remember, Bishop Martin is the bishop who acknowledged that when he chose the location for the one traditional Mass offering in the diocese, he did so on purpose with it in mind to have not enough seating for the number of people who wanted to attend. Offered them too small of a parish for their needs on purpose. All of this, he said, was done in compliance with the direction he got from Rome. So I don't think a letter writing campaign is going to do much. And I don't think online petitions are going to do much. I have never seen an online petition accomplish anything of any real value. Not to be a spoil sport here. But that's what's going on. This is the real problem Rome could be tackling right now. The Pope just talked about how we need to have the liturgical reform of the 1960s calling for the Mass to be offered with reverence and all that, and that the Mass should actually reflect what people claim to believe. Meanwhile, the cardinals and bishops under his direct influence are directing bishops to do quite the opposite. It's an amazing time we live in. I'm very curious what you have to say about this, so let me know what let me know in the comments. Cigar Mode says, Charlotte parishioners need to be firm in their belief and kneel no matter what for our Lord, every person who is physically able. And that will put the onus on this on the priests who don't want to enforce this, but will probably be forced to. That will force the priest to deny people communion or get in trouble with their bishop. This is why you do not have the priests resisting, because they're going to be canceled if they don't go along with it. You will lose many priests in this if they do that. Now, some will say that's probably good, that they should go then join the SSPX and all the rest. Well, it's not. You can't just join the SSPX. They're very, very strict on who they take in because they don't want to have people come in who believe things that were not taught before Vatican II, no matter how conservative a priest they might be. That's why. It's much harder to join the SSPX than people think. And to join like the FSSP and groups like that requires the permission of the bishop who canceled them. That's not likely to happen either. Pray for the people in Charlotte and pray for the bishop there. Well, let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. So like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.